Hey everybody, good afternoon and welcome back to we are here having another extra self-love and quarantine conversation. If this is your first time joining, I've been having since we've been about a topic. And so today I'm so excited. We have Moreno. I just been. How long has
You're breaking up a little something. What was the question?
Oh, we've known each other for like almost 10 years now.
It's 10 years. We're going on a decade, boo.
I know. Oh, and Shami's in the building. Lisa's in the building. As always, as you're hopping on, leave us a comment. If you're watching the replay, give us a hashtag replay. We've got Felix in the building too. So today, can you hear me okay now? Is my connection kind of back? Okay, we're good.
Yeah,
good. It was a little choppy before. But today we're going to be talking about how to have difficult conversation. Well, overall difficult conversations, why they're important, and how to have them. And this topic really comes from, in my work with clients and in just life in general, noticing how much people struggle with setting boundaries, with letting other people know how they really feel, and then as a result, often feeling misunderstood and frustrated. So that's more like on the individual level. Then we have it on the global level where there's all these really high tension, high emotional, socio-political things going on in the world today that creates like difficulty communicating. So I think it's really important to talk about this topic. And the reason why I felt that Rafael is perfect for today's conversation is because he actually has been hosting for the last, how long has it been now? 8 weeks?
8 weeks, no?
8 weeks. He's been hosting a daily Monday through Friday show here on Zoom called Quarantine Cafe. And can you just explain and let people know what that's all about and like why you started it and just a little bit about the evolution of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it started because quarantine, right? I started being quarantined a week before because I work in the entertainment industry. So we started feeling it right away. I went from I worked a lot on the weekends doing parties, and all parties were canceled like within 2 days, right? Naturally. So that happened about a week before. And I was thinking, okay, what am I going to do with this time I'm going to have now? So I decided not to go crazy and be productive. So I was like, okay, so I'm going to just have a talk with my friends and let's see what comes of it. And then my spirit was like, no, you're going to do it all week. I'm like, all week? I talk to myself a lot. I'm like, all week? I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, all week. What are we going to talk about? Should I think about topics? I don't know. I'm just going to dive into it. So we went into it, like literally just like jump on and let's talk about this. And it started just gaining intensity and momentum. And then from one week to the next, it was like, okay, like we get to talk about this. We get to have a conversation on that. And really what I wanted to have from the beginning was just not any conversation. That's why I invited certain friends to come on, and it wasn't absolutely open. I wanted to elevate conversations that were difficult, that people didn't want to have, but existed. So in so doing, I was like, all right, we're caught up in this conversation anyway. We're dealing with it. So let's actually talk about it. Let's bring meaning to it. And my friends and I have tools. Most of us are either speakers or personal trainers. We know each other from Momentum Education and other programs such as. So I was like, yeah, we have tools. So let's have a conversation around how we can heighten this conversation, get to the core of knowledge, how we feel about it, but also what are we going to do about it? At the end of the conversation, how are we going to take whatever it is that was brought up, what we learned about ourselves or our environment, how are we going to bring into the rest of our world in a different way, right? So how are we going to forward? And that's how it's probably happening.
I love it. And can you, like, for people that have never been to Quarantine Cafe, like, what are some of the topics that have been discussed, just so people have an idea of the flavor. It's really across the board. I can just even talk about the ones that I've been to. But yeah, what are some things that you all discussed?
We have discussed everything from
Don't you discuss, right?
gender, the 10 different gender types, double standards between male, female, racial standards, double standards, today in intention, compassion, empathy, gratitude, we've touched on a few times, and each conversation is totally different from, we've touched on gratitude twice already, and every conversation is totally different. Police violence against discrimination against different communities. We've spoken about Ahmaud Arbery. We've spoken about just this week, Breonna Taylor, the role of women in our society, how they might feel silenced, mental health issues. I mean, we're running the gauntlet. Like any
Yeah.
conversation that comes up is like, we bring it in. Sexuality, the difference between sexual identity, sexual orientation, and sexual preference, and how that plays a role in how a person gets to be, and how that changes through time anyway, because you're not the same person that you were at 17, at 27, 37, or 47. So it's the allowance of the evolution of the individual as well. So it's like,
It's the whole thing. It's the whole, like, and that, I remember we were texting about it because you were like, it's like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. But and I know that it's a whole wide array of topics, but just for the audience that has never heard it and that's never been, just to give them like an idea of if that's a type of conversation that they'd want to jump into, and also to really show why I felt you were the best guest for this topic, because difficult conversations need to occur every day. They don't necessarily occur every time they should, but they need to. And I feel like majority of us we're not taught the tools for how to deal with them. But it's just been really beautiful for how you've been hosting the Quarantine Cafe. I mean, I'll speak from my own experience jumping in. I wasn't on for the whole 8 weeks, but I did jump in eventually, like a few weeks ago. And I've been on pretty much almost every day, if not every day, but yeah, pretty much almost every day. And it is a different conversation each time. And it definitely is elevated conversations, and oftentimes difficult ones. You know, things get passionate, things get heated, things get real, things get raw, and people disagree. But what's really beautiful about it is, like you said, the group of people that come in have tools to have these difficult conversations. And while it's not always like pretty and tied up in a bow, and sometimes a little messy and sometimes a little emotional, there's still always a level of respect and a level of openness and listening, in my experience, that happens on the show. Would you agree with that?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
ooh, I'm just thinking about the last 3 days,
Oh
right?
yeah, the last 3 days
Yeah, they've been
were
hot
on.
and heated. And well, first of all, everybody comes in understanding that we allow for everyone's experience. It's not about being right. Everyone brings their own experience into the conversation. It's not a tit for tat. Um, and also, I want to just emphasize that when you come to the Quarantine Cafe, you don't know what the topic is until I introduce it the day of.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't want people to cherry pick, like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. No, like, if you're there to be there for a reason. And whatever it is that you can add to the conversation is only going to enrich it, right? So I don't tell people what the conversation is about. However, what I do is that once I decide on the topic, I will invite professionals to come in to speak on that, or people who I know of have had personal experiences with it. Because, like, for example, like yesterday's topic, which was the woman's voice, I invited as many women as I could reach out to so they can come and like really lend their experience, because I'm a man. I have no idea what it is to be a woman. I can't speak in part of a woman. And I think it's disgustingly selfish for men to do so, right? So I invite women to come in, and I just like basically I ask prompt questions, but I really wanted for them to feel like they had the platform to just put down whatever it was. And what I asked was for men to listen, because we hear our women all the time. We love you, we appreciate you, but a lot of times, and this is something I keep hearing all the time, that women feel like they're not being listened to. So I made that request of men, and they actually did. They listened, which is awesome.
Yeah, yesterday was really, really awesome, just to hear all those powerful women's voices and to be witnessed in our truth. And so with everything, you know, you've been doing this for 8 weeks now, every day. So pretty much like 40 days, right? Because it's only Monday through Friday. So you take your weekends off. What have you learned about having difficult conversations and what it actually requires to have difficult conversations? Because people are tuning in. I mean, like, you know, we've got a bunch of, oh, and people also want to know how to join Quarantine Cafe. So stay tuned. We'll let you know how to join. But yeah, it's every day at 11 o'clock, and I'm there. But so the reason why people are joining, or like what we described this video to be about, is like, how do we have these difficult conversations? How do we engage? And what's the right way to do it? And now that you've been hosting and really facilitating some like really deep stuff for days now, for weeks now, like what have you learned? Like if you could bullet point like what works when it comes to having a difficult conversation.
Yes, jump in. And what I mean by that is, don't avoid the conversation. No matter how difficult it is for you, for whatever the reason is, or how you might perceive that the conversation is going to be received or not received, you just jump in and have it anyway. Because at the end of the day, we're going to have these difficult conversations anyway. So just do it, as opposed to like just having it live in your mind. Put it out there and just step into it and do it. For me, also, the next thing would be doing research. So I like to present facts every time I'm offering a subject matter or a topic. I like to present facts because it makes all the difference. Like when we were speaking about suicide, right?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know those numbers were so prolific. And then when I showed a map of where in the United States suicide rates are higher than others, and how there was like something that stood out on West Virginia. West Virginia had a higher suicide rate than New York, all of these metropolitan places. And it was like, but why? Why is it there? So it brings up the question. Then people come in and they chime in with answers as they know it, right? But really offering the information sets the platform so that you can start building on the question. And if we sit on the question, it provides the opportunity for possibility. Usually when I start with the questions, like I'll drop a question and people be like, yo, it's too early in the morning, bro. Like I can't be existential at this point. And it'll be crickets, crickets, crickets. But I know that they're thinking, they're really being with the question. Because if you phrase the question properly, then what's going to have it is that their defenses and their guards are not going to be up. They're going to be more open to the possibility of coming to a conclusion within themselves while they're in conversation with you. So
Well,
those
also what I gather from it too is that it's provocative, right? Like and I love how you don't tell people what it is, because you just kind of, well, I'll even admit, my first time coming in, I didn't know what to expect, because like tagline just says like elevated conversations, right? So when I hear elevated conversations, I'm like, cool, we're going to talk about like spirituality and philosophical things. And I remember that very first one that I joined, you were like, all right, so let's talk about how you deal with stress. So everyone had like their answers for how they deal with stress. And then you're like, so now we're going to talk about suicide. And I was just like, whoa, I did not like, I was like, can we make a couple stops before we get there? And at first, I mean, that was my knee-jerk reaction, like, can we make a couple stops before we get there? But at the end of the day, I was kind of like, you know what? I do appreciate being provocative like that. And I'm connecting that to what you said about just jump in, because I feel, you know, you said we're going to have these difficult conversations anyway. Or not, right? So oftentimes when we don't have them, then we just cut people off, or relationships fade away, or there just becomes this like weird unspoken gap that gets wider and wider and wider. And 10 years later, we're thinking about our best friend from college and we're wondering what happened and why I'm in my 30s and I'm not talking to this person anymore. And we're like, what even happened? Like, I loved this person, or but it's because we didn't have the difficult conversations, right? And especially when these high triggering socio-political events happen, these gaps get more wide, right? And so we have them or we don't. And when we don't, that's to me what breeds loneliness, isolation, frustration, feeling misunderstood. Because when we don't just jump in and have the conversation, we're just over here like being right and only having our experience and not even understanding what another experience, and we just drift farther and farther away. And it happens in all areas. It happens at work, it happens in family. Like, how often are there family members estranged and they don't talk for like decades, right? Sisters don't talk for decades. It happens in romantic relationships, in friendships. So that's to me, like on the individual level, is like why difficult conversations need to happen, but we don't know how to have them, right? So sometimes you just have to jump in, right? And I'm curious what you think about this too, because what I would add to that is like acknowledging that it's going to be a difficult conversation. Like, to me, because I feel like anyone who joins Quarantine Cafe, we're already acknowledging that it's potentially going to be a difficult conversation because that's what we signed up for, right?
Signed up, like, like could happen, but we're gonna keep it classy.
I mean, you know, sometimes we'll talk about travel and culture and compassion and gratitude, but then sometimes we'll talk about suicide. But it is what we signed up for. Right? Yeah, go ahead.
And even in that conversation in particular, right, suicide. Yeah, I prompted it in a different way because I really wanted us. It might seem off topic completely, but I was just thinking like, how is it that I can, before I introduce this, how can I prepare them to connect with the subject matter? Because I go into suicide, people be like, oh, psh, psh. So what I did was I asked the question like, how do you deal with stress? Like, how do you deal with stress? Because the truth of the matter is that it is, even though it is a mental health issue, people who are committing suicide, what they're dealing with the most is a certain level of stress that they don't understand or they can't comprehend or deal with in such a way that they want to just not.
Yeah.
When they are in a certain place, right? Because again, it is a mental health issue. But that being the case, it's like, how do I get a person like you and I who are, you know, relatively sane and don't have those relatively, and we don't have those lingerings that I know of trying to off oneself. How can I create a bridge so that we can somewhat relate to the struggle that somebody else might be, since we're not in that conversation? So how can I create a bridge through a question? And then after that, even when I introduced the topic, it was like, oh shit. But then when I back it up with, okay, 1 out of 9 people have either thought of or attempted suicide. So that means in this particular quarantine, I think it was 16 people at that time that were on. Somebody here has contemplated or tried to commit suicide.
Yeah.
Right? So it brings it home like, oh shit. So then from there, you can start evolving the conversation of, oh, so like in this particular microcosm, there's somebody that I get to be sensitive with, understanding how I deal with stress, and maybe they don't. So it's like, it brings it together. And then we can continue with the conversation, and it can get ugly. We had someone say, you know, like, I attempted, and that definitely brought the whole spin of it in that particular conversation when somebody opens up. And it happens on every call where people will be like, well, this happened to me, or I did this. And it brings compassion, which we spoke about today. It brings it to like a full 180, like, oh, it's just like 360, right?
Oh, it brings, yeah, it definitely brings it home. And so just to pull out some of the golden nuggets that I'm hearing you say, like in terms of how to have a difficult conversation, right? So opening up with a question that kind of bridges the gap, right? So well, let me kind of back up. So I read a book called Crucial Conversations, which if you're interested, I'll drop the link in the comments. I'll also drop, if that's okay, how people can join Quarantine Cafe in the comments as well. So I'll drop all of that after. I tried to drop it now, but it's not working, so I'm just gonna leave it. But so there's this really, really good book called Crucial Conversations, and it's basically how to have difficult conversations. And one of the main things that I got from it was, okay, there needs to be a crucial conversation that takes place. So here's person A, and they have their pool, right? So it's their pool, and their pool includes their thoughts, their beliefs, their experiences, their filters, their upbringing, their trauma, it's their pool. And then there's person B who has their own pool. Now, oftentimes we're speaking from our separate pools and trying to be like, no, the water's hot. And they're like, no, the water's cold. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then like thinking each other's stupid because we're not bridging the gap, right? So one really powerful thing I heard you say was there needs to be a way to bridge the gap. And so often you do that with a question, or I also heard that you do that with facts, right? So how do we bridge the gap so that now you're combining your pools and you're now having a conversation about the combined pool? You're not having a conversation from two separate pools. And so that was just a game changer for me, because as someone like me who, you know, I'm a Virgo rising, like I'm right, I'm a control freak, like I'm a perfectionist, and I like to be right. I really do. And I like my self-development has been a process of letting that go and just opening up. And so the image of the two pools for me is like, when I come to a conversation now, I'm like, okay, you have a totally different pool that I know nothing about. So like, I'll ask questions. I'll be like, tell me about your pool. Obviously, I don't say it like that, but kind of like how you opened up, how do you deal with stress? You're kind of like having people bring their pool into the conversation so that we can then all have a collective conversation about the combined pool. And I love that it's like with a question, right? Because questions open up possibilities, whereas statements kind of shut them down.
Yeah, statements will have to be right. They will have to be right. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking about a difficult conversation that I had, which was a breakup, and I was totally right. I was totally in the right. Like I had like every right to just light this ass on fire, because it was like, what? And then as soon as the first call, the first ring went, I was just like, I'm getting ready, because I'm like, this is gonna be good. Watch, even over the phone. And then something just said,
you had your 75 PowerPoint slide ready to go.
It was gonna be like and dismiss. And what came up for me was like, yo, don't be right about this. And I was like, huh? And then they're like, hello. And I'm like, huh, oh, so you know what? I switched it completely. And instead of me being right about my position, I just asked. I was like, okay, so this happened. I just want to know, I want to understand you. What was going through your mind? And I said that in a very not condescending way, which took a lot of effort for me.
It's a muscle. It's a muscle.
Yeah, because I mean, my sarcasm is like, huh. So, you know, and me asking like what their perception of the situation was and what had them show up the way that they did, I was like, oh, got it. Because this is the way that it showed up for me. And this is why we most definitely cannot be together. Good luck. That kind of stuff. But it wasn't like an argument of like that argument I could have left this person like hurt and not understanding. But because we had that conversation, and even though it was difficult for both of us, I think that there was a lot of understanding that was done, wherein I would want to say that that person is not going to do that again because they understood that they showed up wrongly.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about the pools, right? Because at first you were going to show up just with your pool and not even concerned about the other pool. But luckily on that first ring, it was like, well, let me see what's going on in that pool. Right. But then with the combined pool, see, here's the thing. Just because you combine the pools, that doesn't mean that you're condoning or agreeing with the other pool, which you didn't. You still maintained that it was wrong. But because you had a perception of, or some knowledge, because opening up with a question for possibility to understand that pool, it was like, okay, yes, I see that pool and I still disagree with it. So now, like, you know what I mean? And that's kind of like for me with a recent breakup as well. It was the same thing. And it doesn't have to be, because I think with difficult conversations, it's like if you're in a different pool, that makes you XYZ, right? And that's where we have people against each other, where it's just like you're just in a different, it could just be neutral, like you could just be in a different pool, and it doesn't have to be an attack on character or an attack on self,
Right.
right? Like combine and come together. And yeah, so how do you, I really love how gracefully you deal with, because you're really facilitating these like strong personalities in there, right? Like even if anyone watching this, like people that know me know I have a strong personality. Anyone that's just meeting you now from watching this can already get that you have one. And obviously you're attracting similar types of people. Like there's a lot of strong, intelligent, wildly successful just people in there. But I really love how you handle like all the differences of opinions and all of that. So what, if you could kind of like to wrap up this whole conversation and bring us home, like what have you learned from navigating all of that that can really support others who are seeking to have difficult conversations in their lives? Like how do you do it? Tell us your ways.
Yeah. You know what? Acknowledging the other person, acknowledging the other person and their experience, even just by echoing, repeating what they just said so that they know that you heard them, that they were being heard. It makes such a huge difference, because what it does is that it keeps them away from having a position and owning their stand, right? Because when you have a position, you want to be right and you're not open to the possibility of anything else. But when you echo exactly what they said to the best of your abilities, then it shows them that whatever it is that they said, you heard. So it's not about agreeing. A lot of times people just want to be heard, especially if a person is hurt. If a person is hurt, don't argue with a person about what the circumstances are, whatever. Like, you're hurt. That means you're hurt because A, B, C, D, and E. Oh shit, he heard me. Great. Sometimes that's all that's needed. And if you're willing to step into the conversation, if you're willing to step down from your pedestal of righteousness and still holding your stand, understanding that it's going to get muddy, acknowledging the other person for whatever it is that they're bringing to the table, then you have a great basis to continue on with a conversation, and it no longer has to be difficult.
Ooh, I like that.
See, that's how I feel when you come into my show and you're like dropping gems, dropping gems. And I'm like, I'm trying to write this down, girl. Like, this is good. This is going to my book.
I know. I come in hot on your show. I really do. And it just comes out of me. But thank you for having the platform to hold that space for all of us. So do you know the number off the top of your head? Because I'm going to drop it in. I have your flyer. I'm going to drop it in the comments for people. But yeah, how do people join Quarantine Cafe? When is it? When can they jump in? Yeah.
So it's going to be, it's every Monday through Friday at 11 a.m. And the Zoom number, which is right over here, the Zoom number is 888-147-289. So that's 888-147-289. And yeah, the conversations, like, we invite everybody to come in. You don't necessarily have to talk once you come into the Zoom call. You can simply listen. We open it to just have a conversation with different perspectives and just add to it, because, there might be something that you say that's contrary to where the conversation is going, but in so doing, it's going to shed some light to other people who think a certain way to think otherwise, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's what makes it really rich. I love it when people that I don't know, I'm like, Delaware, okay.
And they just pop in and they just drop some stuff. Oh, I love it. And I definitely really love that your first point was like to just jump in, because there were definitely moments where, like, it's definitely easier for me to jump in sometimes and other times, right? And there were, especially this week, where I was feeling some kind of way and I was like, no, I'm not going to say that. And I was like, no, I'm going to say that. I love that you've created a space where we can just do that. And it's like, whether people agree or not, we just talk it out. And I feel like absolutely over time, we're all learning how to have difficult conversations just by participating in the ones that you're hosting. So I love that. Well, thank you so much for being here. Just to bottom line, what are our points? So say it's gonna be acknowledge the difficulty that it could potentially be. Mm-hmm. Ask questions, bring facts, maybe not 75 slide PowerPoints about being right, but facts that support the conversation. Mm-hmm. Find a way to bridge a gap via asking questions.
And allow for the person to show up.
Yeah.
Like if we're talking about context and content, like what you really want to do when approaching a difficult conversation or a conversation that could potentially be difficult, what you want to do is hold a context that's going to elevate that conversation. So if you let go of being right, and let's say like if you lead with the context of love, if that works for you, then however it may look, it's not going to be harmful to the other person in a way that they won't get the information that you're trying to relay.
Yeah. To the other person or to you, because you're holding the space with the love. Yeah. I love it. Thank you so much, Rafael, for being here. I was so excited. I hope you had as much fun as I did. To those of you watching, thank you so much for watching every single time. As always, Wind Down Wednesday with me and Felix every Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Grab your favorite glass of wine or something stronger if you've had that kind of week, and join us in the conversation. And I usually have other guests throughout the week that I announce here on Facebook, so just keep it locked. And I will see you all soon. Thank you, Rafael.
You're welcome. And thank you for your show. And thank you and Felix. I'm going to be up on One Down Wednesday.
I know we need you on our
wine. This Dominican loves tequila, yo. Like, that's my shit. That's what I bought last time.
Tequila, please, martini. You know, bring whatever. Come as you are. Come as you are.
Hey, that's it. I'm gonna come with my tequila, my guira, and a little hat because I'm international, y'all. I'm all over the place. I'd be like eating bok choy with plátanos. Who does that? This one.
You do. Great. Well, we need that kind of energy. So we'll see you there on Wind Down Wednesday. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.